meeting, thank you for all for joining, is that we had the committee of which actually Christopher, myself, and Tu were part, and we received your papers, and we thought, well, we can give prizes, but there's also something, of course, that we would like to share as academics with respect to feedback on the papers and the things that we thought of it, and maybe to improve, but also to have a bit like a policy discussion on it. So that is the main reason for having a bit of this workshop, also to provide you in this quite efficient times with a bit of feedback on the work and a bit of discussion on that. What I would like to do is just to go over the agenda quite quickly. Is we have two presentations, and in the mid we have some kind of a feedback round. I have prepared some feedback, actually quite extensive feedback, I must say, on the basis of the papers. But it could well be that that Christopher, Jane, all the others who've read the papers too, Ingo, join in. So I try to keep it also short from my end a bit, than to give a bit of room. But let me ask let's say the China exporting paper. Who's going to present that of the people present? Unmute.
Yes.
Del, are you going to do that?
Yes, I'm Ying from the Center for Finance Economics in Beijing, and also my co-author, I think it's Miao Zhang, but actually the name showed that like Del, who will also present the theoretical part. So yeah. We two together will present our paper. And
I have questions for you both, so that's okay.
Okay, that's
okay.
all.
Go ahead. You have some 20 minutes. And then we have some discussion, I guess. Let me check. Yeah.
So I think I can share, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So guys, can you see them?
Perfectly well.
Okay. Okay, actually that is I think that is a very interesting paper. So it's about service trade liberalization's effect on product mix adjustment, or generally speaking, that is a product strategy or diversification strategy of China's exporting. So yeah, here's the comments. So the contents, and okay, give you a little bit of background. So about the services trade, actually, services sector generate more than 2/3 of economic output, and also account for more than 2/3 of FDI, and also contribute a lot to the jobs or employment. And also the share of services trade actually increased very fast from about less than 10% in 1980s to now it's about 20%. So all the data actually get from World Trade Report. And then when we compare the growth rate of services trade and goods trade, we can see, yes, it's obviously that services trade or the growth rate of services trade is much larger, it's much bigger than goods trade, perform much better. And then we go to a little bit about China's export. As everybody knows, after China entered into WTO, China export can increase very fast, right? But actually, after financial crisis, China's export still grows, but the growth rate actually going down. Okay, so that means China's export actually went into or experience a kind of adjustment period. But when we are counting the diversification, or we're counting the product, the scope, product number of China's export, averagely speaking, China's export product scope still increase, not that much, but the trend is still there. So then we ask the question, so why? Maybe something like services trade liberalization could be a reason for this product strategy. or during this kind of adjustment period, it's not just all the increasing, maybe during those part, like the strategy of export, like maybe market strategy or product strategy could be much more important. Okay, so then we ask the questions. What is the effect of services trade liberalization on China's export strategy? And also, we might focus on service trade liberalization not only on China, but also, or mostly focus on destination countries. And then we ask what is the mechanism? Maybe everybody but knows. So we try to set up a kind of very traditional theoretical model to explain the reason. Okay, then just a very preliminary summary of our results. For the empirical part, yes, service trade liberalization promotes export and also increase the product diversity for China. And we'll also find another very interesting result, that is service trade liberalization increase the relatedness of diversification for OECD countries, but lowers related diversification for non-OECD countries. And then service trade liberalization had larger impacts on the product diversification for different destinations. Yeah, with better institution environment or not, so that's really important. And then from the theoretical mechanism, actually first, services trade liberalization lowers marginal cost, such as financial cost, transportation cost, information cost, or management cost. And also, this kind of reduction of marginal cost will increase both export and also the scope for the strategy in destination countries. And also the mechanism, it could be the heterogeneous effects for different kinds of products. So the core product increase in less proportions, while the marginal product increase in higher proportions. So maybe that is the reason why it will increase the diversification of exporters. And about the literature, actually, this trend of literature mostly focus on goods trade liberalization. So such as, output liberalization varied by tariffs and also input liberalizations. So, but the results are quite different. So output liberalization promotes just market competition and will shrink the product diversification. But for input liberalization, will promote export product scope. So the quite different result for goods trade liberalization. And for services trade liberalization, actually, there are some papers very related with ours, but they just have different aspects, such like the export values, such as the value added of the exports quality, or maybe services trade. But also there were some other papers just to focus on some sectors, individual services sectors, such like internet, communications. But what are the effects of services trade liberalization on the product strategy for China's exports? So maybe that is a literature gap. So we just want to explain this. And then the main contributions actually for the literature, we have three aspects. First, we focus on services trade liberalization, and especially focus on service trade liberalization in destination countries. So we will control all the other policies, such as China's service trade liberalizations, FDI policies, and also tariffs liberalization in goods trade, and then focus on why we want to focus on services trade liberalization in destination countries. That is, we want to distinguish the input liberalization with services liberalization. So we want to contribute a little bit about the effect of services trade liberalization. We will highlight the service liberalization characteristics, especially the non-tradable characteristics, or the mode of services trade is much related with commercial presence, and also related with within border regulations. So it will not only have effects on exporters to decrease the exporting cost, but also very related with the local firms. So that is for different destinations, maybe this effect a little bit different, and then it could drive our results for the heterogeneity for OECD countries and non-OECD countries. And then for the mechanism, we just based on all this empirical results, we set up a kind of direct model to explain it. Okay, I think maybe we're very familiar with this due to time limitations. So yeah, I just keep very.
I was going to say that indeed.
Okay. So you want to know something about this?
Yes, I do, but
okay.
Quick.
Okay, so yeah, it's about FDI, and also in our robust test, we will use services trade restrictive index as a robust test. And also about the background of services trade liberalization. So we first show a trend. We can see globally or averagely, world services trade liberalization just it's a rising trend. And then it also has some heterogeneity for different countries. Like China, yeah, the highest level of restrictiveness, that's less liberalized. And also we show some pictures for the sectors. For different sectors, we also have some heterogeneity or variations. So here's countries by sectors. We can see, yeah, for different countries in different sectors, actually this liberalization measures could be very good to catch some variation. Then maybe you may ask a question, so what is the intuition of this paper? So then we try a lot to find a case, and then we just use a case of a hire. It is a white electronic multinational firms in China. It's a very famous brand. I don't know, guys, if you know that, but it's in China, yeah, it's very popular. I think it has go abroad very well. They have a lot of products and a lot of factories in different countries, and the product actually sells very well overseas. So then we just try to compare UK and the Philippines. We try to get the information about the product sold in different locations. So like UK very liberalized, but the Philippines less. Okay, so here's the FDI restricted index number. So UK is very low, very liberalized, but Philippines, yeah, very high restricted. And then we can see for different products, actually UK just sell more product counting the numbers. But the very interesting thing is that Philippines, maybe for each product like refrigerators or washing machines, yeah, less variety than UK, but in Philippines actually higher, just export more product. Maybe we call it less related, like air conditioner or TV. Okay, so that from this case we could say yes, like UK, more liberalized countries, they export more varieties. But for Philippines, actually, this diversification maybe it's not as good as UK, but actually they export more unrelated products. So here's the picture for them. So we can say, yeah, for UK, yeah, maybe the quality is much higher than Philippines. Okay. Then about the data. So we have three databases actually. First is China customs data, and also we combine on industry province level with the OECD FDI restricted database, and also for China service trade liberalization. Although it is only a control variable, so we'll also use IO table to combine them. And then about this is the key variables and how to measure them. So just keep them. Okay. So then about the product strategy or diversification strategy, actually we use a a lot of them, actually 5 of them. First is just counting the numbers of product scope. And then
I'm going to warn you if you want to have any time left for your colleague, but also quite
really,
a complex model in the paper.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'll just go fast.
So you have some more 10 minutes in total. So I'm just warning here.
Okay. Can I borrow 5 minutes?
Yes, because in the schedule it says, yes, you can, because in the schedule it says it's 25 minutes feedback, but it's 25 to 55, which is actually 30. So there's a mistake in the schedule, so you can have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ken. Maybe that is a lot of friends, so I just want to share more. So I'll just hurry up. Okay, yeah. First the product scope, then diversity index, and then smoothness is just the opposite to the HHI index. And also we also have captured the product switch, okay? And then like the adding and external products, and also the relatedness of diversification. So yeah, just go directly to the specifications. So we control all the other policies about the goods trade liberalization, about FDI policies in China, or also in destination countries. And then just to go to very baseline results. So we can say DSL is the service trade liberalization in destination countries. So we could say, yeah, all the result is very robust. That means service trade liberalization in destination countries really increase the diversification strategy for China's exports, okay? And then we do by service sectors like distribution, transportation, information, finance, and business service, and all the results are still there, positive and also very significant. And then about the relatedness about diversification, as the case study of Haier, we can say yes. So we only could say, yeah, service trade liberalization just increase the relatedness for non-OECD countries. Okay, decrease the relatedness for non-OECD countries, but for OECD countries, actually couldn't see the results. Then we do all the robust tests, and also we do some heterogeneity by capital-intensive industry, labor-intensive industry. We could also say OECD countries and the non-OECD countries, yeah, we got the very different results. So for capital-intensive industry, maybe for OECD countries, yeah, it has competitive advantage compared with China. But for labor-intensive industries, China really have competitive advantage, not only for developing countries destination, but also for developing countries. Okay, and for the tech intensity, like high tech or low tech, we could see. Could you see the results that for non-OECD country positive, significant, but for OECD countries only significant and positive for low tech, high tech, no results. So that is why. So let's lead to the theoretical part. Sorry, John. So I just spare more time.
Thank you, Professor John. Yeah. I try to finish my part in 5 minutes.
So I need to stop, right?
Yeah, you need to stop the sharing screen.
Okay, wait, I'm just trying to do that.
Yeah, we cannot help you here.
Is this one?
Yeah. Well.
Oh, yeah. I tried to finish my part in 5 minutes. Actually, in the empirical part, we find that the service liberalization promotes from export and export diversification, but the results are different in developing countries and developing countries. We see that the products diversification increased a lot in developing countries, but not in the developed countries. My model is to try to explain why the findings are quite different here. So in our model, we use a quiz linear demand function. Using that demand function, we can get a linear, you use a quiz linear preference function for each consumer. And using that utility function, we can get a linear demand function. Why we use a linear demand function here? Because we want to identify the difference in elasticity by different kind of products. For example, high quality products has relatively low demand elasticity, and the low productive firm has relatively high demand elasticity. Or if for each firm, their core products has a relatively low demand elasticity. We want to measure that thing, so we use the linear demand function. Rely on this linear demand function, we see that if the firm reduces the marginal cost by a certain amount, then they will see a greater rising in their margin products, but not in the core product, right? Because if they reduce their price by the same rate, their core products, the demand change of their core product will change a little bit, but the change in their margin product will rise a lot, right? That's our intuition here. So in that case, the firm will diversify their products, because due to the more share of the margin products. The definition for between the core products and the margin products is that for the core products, the quality level is relatively high, or the marginal production cost is relatively low. Okay, so in that case, the firms will diversify their exported products in response to a certain amount of decrease in their marginal cost. And the next is why. I will skip all these complicated formulas here and go into the intuition directly, because due to the time limitation. So why is the results are heterogeneous in the developing countries and developed countries? Because in developed countries, they pursue competitive advantage in the high-tech industries, right? So in that industries, the quality levels of the products from the developed countries are relatively high. So in that case, when the service civilization occurs in a developed countries, the local firm will gain more than the Chinese firms. So in that case, they will gain more power to create out Chinese firms. So in that case, in response to that liberalization, Chinese firms will specialize more in their own competitive advantage industries. That's the intuition of our result. So in conclusion, our model wanted to measure two things. One is why for each firm they diversify their exported products. The second is to measure why the diversification results a difference between the developing country and the developed countries. So that's all my explanation for the empirical results.
Thanks
I think I saved a lot of time, right?
Yeah, you're within the time. That's really amazing and so clear. So that is really like so the two of you are ready for comments or something to add, or no?
Yeah, ready for comments. Yeah.
Ready for comments. Okay, thank you. So let me kick off with a bit of things. So I'm very sorry because you prepared your slides in LaTeX. I can see that as a big LaTeX lover, and I blew up mine. Luckily, I made some bullet points, but I would like to schedule my my reference to you in, let's say, 3 areas. So first is actually why we liked your paper so much as a jury, but also personally. The second part is that I will provide some discussion points, I think, with the paper. And the third one, I think, is important, that I would like also to make a link to the policy kind of implications and discussion. Clearly, these things are just an opening up also of the discussion. So let me start with what did we like? So first of all, I think I like the data a lot that you use. And it's a compliment not only to you, but also to the Chinese government, that they provide this data set that is now used by many researchers as a showcase on what you can actually do with trade data. So that the way you use it, so that I really like. But what I especially like is the way, in the creative way in which you use this big data set to shape some, especially the dependent variables, to say something meaningful about, let's say, the economics, and also connect that to services. So it's a pretty hard thing what you do in making these dependents saying something about the real world, and not just say this is the number of goods, etc. You really try to create things with that, and that I especially liked in the setup. And that's not easy. And I think it's also the way in which you connect to this servicification component, the topic also of the World Conference, how you try to include that for manufacturing in a very credible way, I would say. I liked a lot. So, these were the things. What I also liked, Mr. Dell, is that the humble way of using the model. So I think in general, you are humble, sometimes a bit too humble, but one thing that I particularly like is that if you have an empirical paper and you try to pinpoint empirical results by having the model after the empirics, although you see it more and more, I think it's really the nice way of presenting that theory should explain something that we see, that as some kind of an outcome. So I really liked also the ordering of the paper in the way in which it was presented, as to highlight. And also in your presentation, I think you also pay attention to the intuition of these things, of why the theory connects to the empirical outcomes. So these were things in the paper that I really liked. So really well done. Now, to open up the discussion, so these are 3 points, and I have 3 points for the discussion, and maybe they are not that difficult to anticipate. So my first point of discussion is the use of let's say FDI restrictions as a measure for service restrictions, and there can be potentially a few worries here. So first worry could be is that there is a very big theoretical literature which actually stresses the trade-offs between FDI and exports. Now, it might be difficult to sell if you talk about a paper of exports that you're actually using an FDI restriction, where there is, from a from strategic perspective, if you think about the Helpman-Antras papers, so much attention for the strategic shift between exports and FDI. So the first worry would be for me a bit like, so how can you sell an FDI index as related to services and therefore an input into our input cost, or affecting the marginal input cost? Also because there are now quite a few data, also by the OECD, by the way, on actually directly saying something about services restrictiveness. So why not, the World Bank has this, why not go for a more directly connected services restrictions index? I can think of one bad reason not to, and that is actually the graph that you show, is that there's not much going on with respect to services liberalization in these data. So it would be very difficult to use as identification. But of course, this would be a mean reason. So I'm not expecting you as mean to be as me. Like but at least that's a bit like an area for me to have a bit of a worry. The second thing that I would stress a bit more for clarification is a modeling thing, I would say. So if you take your model, then the big thing that stands out to me while reading it is the difference with let's say the seminal Bernard paper of 2011, where for multi-product firms, let's say the key result is that they actually concentrate more on several products instead of diversification more. So you have at least for non-developed countries an opposite effect. Now, the question is a bit, where does this come from? So that is not that clear for me in that paper. Where is the difference with the Bernard paper come from? And I can think of two areas. I think that if you take the Bernard paper, then I would say the key merits component that makes that result is actually the mobility of labor. So whereas in the Mailitz model, you have labor mobility going to more productive firms and therefore they grow, in the Bernard model, actually, the firm concentrates labor more on, let's say, the competitive products and therefore they close it down. Now, I'm not so sure whether that effect is actually in your paper. And that would also explain it. On top of that, you use Mailitz-Ottaviano's, let's say, pro-competitiveness setting, which has, I would say, flexible markups, which in your case captures a competition quite well, but it probably drives a lot of the effects of using, I would say, I'm not saying that Mailitz-Ottaviano is a fringe model, but the pro-competition effect you probably need a lot. And a worry would be that, that as this is not, let's say, the standard model, I would say something about it, how that drives the results of the quality ladders. So, which is a strong result. So that part, I would see a bit more improvement. And the third one is, I think that, or maybe you can explain it, although I understand that if you look at the product range of the firm, you can work with firm fixed effects to, let's say, take out of like all kinds of endogeneity issues and selection issues, by the way. Mm-hmm. There is still, let's say, not only the extensive margin of the products, but there's also the intensive margin that they're concentrating on. And I would say that you can only correct for that using firm, let's say, firm characteristics on top of the fixed effects, I would say. So for the intensive margin, now I think there are quite a few options that other papers use to control for specific firm specific effects on, let's say, the intensive margin that you could explore, or at least explain why you chose only, let's say, for a firm fixed effect approach, at least as I can see. Maybe you can comment on it. My third slide would have been the policy connection. I think you are far too modest about the position of China. And so by stressing that, so I think that you can look at it different ways, but you say, well, China is especially strong sometimes in low quality products, etc. I think maybe the picture is quite nuanced. Maybe there are firms from China who actually select themselves into developing countries with less quality products. That would be fun, but I don't think we consider in Europe, where I'm from, China nowadays as a low quality producer at the end of the market. So especially that is something that sometimes I think it's a bit too humble. But what I do think, what you also under stress, you're too humble in your paper, is that I think that you treat services as very much things of behind the border. And I applaud you for stressing the fact that in your model, services affect domestic and foreign firms the same. And that drives it. But you can also say a big problem nowadays for China would probably also be, let's say, the violation of national treatment in export markets, especially also with access to services probably. And that would strengthen your results a lot. So maybe you can think it's a policy relevance, maybe also in the next paper, if you consider the fact there's so much implicit discrimination against Chinese firms arising, how that would actually affect your results. So take that a bit broader. And I think that the mechanisms that you're stressing are very, very interesting. So maybe you undersell this a bit by restrictions. So academically, I like it. But the other thing is that maybe a policy connection to direct exporting here, but you have this global value chain literature, I would say, which is quite important. Now you can say customs data and direct exports don't connect that well to global value chains immediately. Well, that's at least you don't want to overstress global value chains, but it is something to take into account that you look at services in export markets, but also for China, and especially moving up value chains, this within firm connections are very important. And I'm missing this a bit in the discussion in the paper. So I think that the discussion of the paper is quite short, but that would be a natural extension in the modern world of intermediate goods. From a strategic perspective, what I find really interesting, from a strategy perspective, what would you advise Chinese firms to lobby for? Services trade liberalization or not? Or would they shout for services trade liberalization in developing countries and not in developed countries? Something like that. So I was thinking about this kind of, what is actually the lobbying? If I'm a firm lobbyist, what are the implications of the paper? And they're actually quite complex, I guess. So this is my quite extensive kickoff, maybe, of a discussion with you on things. Maybe to schedule just you first fire back at me, and then I open the floor for some other comments.
John, you want to first, or okay?
Maybe you first.
Thank you, Han. So many comments. I just try to remember all of them. I write down all of them. But actually, some of them are really difficult. But I just try to very briefly comment a little bit. Okay, like FDI restrictive index. So why we use that? Because of the data quality. Because services trade restrictive index only available from 2014 till now. So, but our data set is from 2010 to 2016. So we did do the robust test for service trade restrictive index, and all the results are still there. But the time period just a little bit shortened. About the model part, John, so you can just respond a little bit. So about all,
yes.
Okay, so about the, you give us a very, very good suggestions is about the variation of national treatment. So in this paper, actually, we can show China's services trade liberalization. But our story actually mostly focus on services trade liberalization in importing country or destination country. So that is why we can connect our empirical model with our theoretical model. So based on that, we have very different effect of this services trade liberalization in destination country on the local firms and also China's exporting firms. So for different countries like developed country or developing countries, so this effect could be a little bit different. That is why drive our results of the relatedness. Okay, so about policy implication, yes, this is very difficult, but I have one point that is, okay, so services trade liberalization, we really need to make it more, how to say, systematic, or okay, exporting countries and importing countries at the same time, they should liberalize their services sectors. So people may think, for exporting countries, maybe like China, you export a lot and you just liberalize your services market. So maybe that is important. But at the same time, the importing countries, such like a lot of developing countries, also need to liberalize if China want to diversify their product strategy. And also for OECD countries or developing countries, actually, they have been very liberalized. Maybe for some sectors, we could not say all of them, but okay. Yes, so maybe that is one of my thinking for policy application. Yep. So John, you want to add something more, or Han?
I just wanted to respond to two questions because I just have the answers for these two questions. The first one is that I don't know whether my understanding is right. Professor Rose Farmer, you mentioned that we need to model the cross-border factors in our specification model, right? But I think we have already do something in that, because in my model, we distinguish the difference between ordinary intermediate input and the input or service product, because the intermediate input can only applied in the home country, and benefit the producers, also exporters. But in the service sectors, the products can benefit both the importers and the local producers, because these inputs can work across borders. Because for example, if we want to make some product, your intermediate input only applied in the production process, but the service product applied to both the production and sales process, also transportation, right? For example, if we want to export your product to some destination country, you need the financial services in destination country, the transportation sectors in destination country, all the some kind of a telecommunication, something like that. So that means this input, intermediate input from the service sectors can be cross-border. So in my model, we just see that although the product is in a destination country, but the production is not end, right? It's not end. So the production, the general meaning of the production continue in the destination country. So in my model, the production cost decrease in response to service liberalization. So that's my response to the first question. Second one, you mentioned that whether the service liberalization transmit to the production cost immediately. I think the transfer is very fast, because it's especially in the financial sectors. Because I have another paper look at how the financial sector's liberalization affects the importer of this country. We found a very strong positive connection between the two. Because for example, the Chinese firms, they need to get the supply of credit if we want to make the export. So in that case, they need the banks in China and both the bank in the destination country. They have a very good connection or relationship.
Right.
Another thing is that the interest rate in destination country is low enough. All the supply
it's
of
also
credit
a nice
is
connection to the next paper.
Oh yeah. So that's my response to these two questions.
Thanks. Yeah, let me open up to the TIISA network. Maybe Ingo first, but because he has to leave quickly.
Well, thanks very much. Yes, I have to run in a few minutes. I haven't thought nearly as deeply about the paper as Hein has, so I have to base my comments on the presentation, which is an absolute shame, because I was very impressed with your presentation. I mean, I really should go back and read the paper. It seems a marvelous piece of work, really.
Definitely, you should.
In all brevity, two comments. One is products are arguably differentially intensive in their services inputs. People have come up, for instance, with a taxonomy about data intensity of products, and clearly from input-output tables, you could probably derive some sort of services intensiveness of certain products. And so we would expect, if your story holds, that these product diversification effects are more pronounced for those products that rely more intensively on services inputs, because the input price shocks are more important, right? And so if you could sort of make this work with some sort of interaction effect or whatever, or partition the sample, right? And make it almost a placebo test that it shouldn't work for products that hardly use any services and are much more pronounced for other things, I think that would lend a lot of credibility to your results, at least to the channel that you are envisaging. And that seems fairly straightforward. The other comment, which is less straightforward, is you make a lot of these idea that the core channel is the lowering of input prices. And then you take the Melitz-Ottaviano model and you crank it through to some output results. But a lot of this is now in your story tied to FDI. And foreign-owned firms have this transfer pricing rationale, right? So where the firm owns both sides of the imports and the exports, or, you know, of that trade flow, it's not. There might be additional considerations for, you know, how the firm configures the size of this input price shock and these services. Whereas for other firms who purchase services at arm's length, that might be different. If you were able to observe ownership in your data set, it could be interesting to see how that plays out in two different subsamples of your data. That's it. Thank you very much for a great presentation.
So for the second suggestion, that's really good. So how about the FDI firms and the domestic local Chinese exporters?
Yeah.
So we do that is fine, right? So actually we did that.
Okay.
So is it the extension from that direction?
Well, you know, I just thought that if you were able to observe where these Chinese firms procure their services from an affiliated enterprise or from a non-affiliated enterprise,
Okay.
that could be interesting. But it's not clear whether you see this in the data.
Sourcing.
Let me hand over to somebody else. Thanks very much for being able to.
Yeah, thank you for shooting it in. Thanks, Ingo. Other questions from the network? Jane, maybe? Hildegun? Yeah, Hildegun, go ahead.
Yes, so first of all, thank you for a very nice paper. I liked it also for the same reasons as Heinz. And but just one issue that you could maybe think about, and that is, so you look at and you talk about how services are inputs into goods exports and how they are important. And that is kind of a bit of a general issue. And maybe you should enhance a bit more how it actually contribute to product diversification as opposed to just exports in general. And there, I think there are two issues that also links quite nicely to your model. And that is, of course, this consumer love of variety, which is in your model. But then it's a bit of a puzzle that you find that the effect is largest in non-OECD countries, and because you would think that love of variety is kind of income elastic, so you would have a higher love of variety in OECD countries than non-OECD countries, if I understand your results correctly. And the other issue with product diversification is branding. And branding is very much related to kind of gathering information about consumers and their preferences and to target consumers. So that would be pretty much in a story about having access to consumer data and data flows issues in international trade. So maybe if it's not possible to do it empirically, at least it could be kind of mention how exactly this affects product diversification rather as opposed to just exports in general. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris.
Yes, very interesting presentation. Hein and I talked about the paper, and so I appreciate his very nice presentation of the various talking points. Tonight, what I've been thinking about is some aspects of the calculation of the variables involved. For example, as I understand it, what you do is you look at the services restrictiveness at home in the exporting country and in the destination country. And in the home country, you've got some notion of a share to which, the extent to which services are used in the production process, and you use that share to come up with an overall index of restrictiveness. One concern is that share is a function itself of the level of restrictiveness. So I wonder whether it's worth exploring. So for example, in that, when a sector is highly restrictive, then that service may not be bought in very much. It might be provided in another way. It'll have a low weight in your index, and that might be a misleading outcome. And so I wonder whether there's a way of checking the sensitivity to that sort of feedback effect. And similarly, on the other side, in the model, I think you've got a tariff in the destination country on the relevant product, and been thinking about probably something that Hildegan tried to explain to me once about the bundling of services and goods together. And if you've got a high tariff, it might lead to an unbundling of the goods and the services. So the tariff only applies to the physical good, and the services are provided in another way. And so again, that endogeneity, I wonder whether that's an issue in what you're actually observing and measuring in the model. So just really interesting story, and it's great to see this focus on the relationship between access to services and export and characteristics of export performance. But there's a lot, seems to me there's a lot going on in both directions.
Some final comments from your side, or you totally agree?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think, yeah, a lot of good, very, very good suggestions. And then, yeah, we have revised the paper actually. So yeah, we will, yeah, try to, yeah, follow up all the comments and then to write up and revise the paper. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again for presenting the excellent paper, and I hope we also gave some input for extending your conclusions with the policy relevance, because I would like to end. You're too humble about your results, so you need a good concluding part where you stress the importance of what you're doing also from a real world perspective. So that would be my last fatherly advice. Let me move to the next paper by Salomon and Ronka, I think. Can you share and present?
Yeah, just a quick, I'm Solomon Lakojo. So just to give you a kind of background on how we'll go about presenting this, there are 6 subsections or outline that we want to present, and my colleague will be presenting the first 3 parts, while I will be focusing on the last 3 parts. I think she's online now, she can pick up. Thank you.
Okay, so hello.
Hi.
Yeah. As you can see, this is the outline of the presentation. Let me move to the next one. Sorry. Okay. All right. So services trade and services value added has improved considerably in Africa, but that being said, when you compare it to that of the European Union, you find out that we are still far behind when it comes to services. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, she's just sneezing, I guess.
Oh, okay, let me amend my earpiece. Can you hear me now?
I hear you perfectly fine, but somebody else was sneezing. So maybe Sarah mutes the Lenovo iPhone.
Okay, let me start again. I was saying that services trade and services value added has improved considerably in Africa, but when you compare it to that of the European Union, you see that Africa is still far, far behind. Now, looking at the statistics and, you see that the cross-border exchange of goods and services between Africa and the European Union has experienced a strain also, majorly because of the de-risking in the global financial market. One cannot blame global financial institutions for trying to restrain from doing business with some of the local banks in Africa. That's because of the long list of illegal activities that some of them have been identified with. So hence, we try to look at the de-risking in terms of the relationship between the two regions. Now, financial services like, for example, international wire transfer, is needed for us to experience services, improved services trade between Africa and the European Union. And it is not only in terms of services trade alone, we also need it for merchandise trade. We also need it for economic growth, especially in the case of Africa, since it's far behind. Let me move to the next slide. Okay. All right. So when we look at these two charts, the trend line of the share of European Union in the total Africa trade in services is declining. Even though there was an increase in 2015 and 2016, the breaking down the services trade into different components, which is what we see on the second chart, we also observe that travel and government goods and services, they are stable over the years, but other business services and construction, they are experiencing a fall in their own trends. Okay, here we also noticed that travel services and transport, those two are the ones that are experiencing an increase in their trends. But for other business services, there's a decline in the trends. Looking at the major services imports that EU obtains from Africa. Okay, these two, as we see it, we are looking at the corresponding banking relationships, and we can see that the corresponding banking relationships dropped between Africa and Europe. North Africa has the highest decline. When we're looking at it in terms of Africa, they experience the highest decline in the relationship, whether you're looking at it from the first chart or the second chart. And Central Africa experienced the least decline. In terms of Europe, Northern European countries experienced the highest decline. I assume that is just sheer coincidence, having North Africa and Northern European countries experiencing the highest decline, while Eastern European countries are the ones with the least decline. Okay, so to quickly review the theories and evidence before I pass it on to Solomon, there are debates about the standard trade theories. How well do they explain services trade? And some standard trade theories have been said to hold for services trade. However, in the view of standard trade theories not completely explaining services trade, Jones and Rowan, 1990, built a model. And that model was shared into two parts, taking care of services factor and services product. That said, studies in this area have mostly used gravity model. That's the model they mostly adopt. So the summary of the studies that we reviewed, major studies that we reviewed, and their results are presented on this slide. Okay, so we can see from their objectives, the results that they obtained, trying to link it to the results that we have there. Sorry about that. Okay, so Walsh was trying to let us know that wealth of the countries and the languages they speak are major determinants of services trade, while Kaur, I hope I pronounced the name properly, is trying to let us understand that USA has a convergence when it comes to exports of services with just 3 Asian countries, and there was a divergence with other 3 Asian countries like Japan and Singapore. And Kimura and Lee, trying to look at factors that determine bilateral services trade. They also used gravity like the other 2 studies, and they tried to look at the complementary between goods, exported goods and imported goods, while Karam and Zaki, they are trying to examine the determinants of aggregate flows, and they came up saying that when a country is a WTO, World Trade Organization member, that tends to increase their trade in services. Now, the summary that we can just have from this table is that neither of them used corresponding banking relationship, trying to look at how or whether the de-risking that has been very rampant recently, in recent years, by financial institutions, whether it limits or it has been increasing the potential gains that bilateral services trade has to offer, and which is what we did, trying to focus on Africa and the European Union. Thank you. Solomon.
Thank you, Olaronke, for the presentation. I'm trying to share the screen from my side.
Okay.
So.
You have to be careful with your microphone, by the way, that we will hear you talking into it, but that's for later concern. Well, we can hear you, but maybe by...
Yeah, can you hear me now?
That is better, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm struggling with this screen.
We see it, by the way.
Yeah. Is the screen on?
Yeah, you need to go slideshow and then.
Yeah, I'm trying to locate that. Then just one. Okay, share.
Slideshow at the top.
You can also go down. Next to the 74%, you see an icon. Down, 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 down with your mouse.
Yes, I can see the share screen and some. I'm coming. Okay. Okay. Let me see.
Can Sarah manipulate?
Is this on?
Yeah, well, just go ahead with this. I think it's clear for all of. No,
okay.
not clear.
Yeah. I think maybe Olarunke can help share it from her side. I don't know. Something is wrong. So okay. So the next thing the next presentation I'm going to be doing now is looking at the methodology and estimation techniques and data. In terms of analytical methods, we try to partition the analysis into aggregate sample and aggregate services trade. That is
Solomon, I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry for that, but I don't think it's shared really well. So either you unshare it I think, or at least I cannot see it clear, and I think the others will not.
Solomon, unshare it so that I can share it at my hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
It probably has something to do with the speed of the laptop, not so much on what you can do.
Yeah.
So if Olaronka can share it, that would be fine, I think.
Okay.
So if you stop sharing, Solomon.
Yeah. Let me see. Okay, stop share.
Yeah.
I stopped this one.
Just the speed, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Next slide.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So
No.
like I was saying, so we, in terms of analytical approach, we partition the analysis into the, aggregate sample and aggregate services trade between EU and Africa. And of course, that comprises of 22 EU economies and of course 11 African economies. And of course, the other side, the other kind of set of analysis we did is to look at the components of these services in terms of what is actually being traded in terms of different types of forms of services between EU and Africa. So looking at it from that angle, we also consider the trade pattern, talking about the total export of this component and of course the import of the component. So, and in terms of technique, we use Postman and Taylor estimation method to estimate the equation that comprises of 1, 2, 3, and 4, that is the aggregate model, and the one that has to do with the components of services trade between EU and Africa. So the question is, why do we use Ostman-Taylor model in estimating this? First, we need to capture to take care of potential heterogeneity between services trade and real GDP, bearing in mind that services export or trade depends on gross output. And at the same time, output is also a component of, services is also a component of gross output itself. So we suspect a sort of endogeneity between the two. And of course, the approach that we use, that is Ostman and Taylor model, also captures the issue of heterogeneity bias that we may have, because like it's been presented by my colleague talking about EU, Africa, and even among the African countries, we can definitely be sure of heterogeneity when it comes to some of the variables that we considered. And of course, we estimated a sort of unbalanced panel data, and of course, the Ostman and Taylor approach is quite suitable to explain that. So the next slide, please. Sorry, I don't have the control from my side here. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of the results, because of the time, the trading services between the aggregate model. I want you to go back a bit, please, Ronke. Yes, yeah. In terms of the results in the aggregate model, we found that considering the time variant exogenous variables, that is comprising of real GDP per capita in Europe, among the European countries, it's actually having some positive impact on services trade on aggregate services trade rather, between EU and Africa. And of course, we also found some quite shocking results in the case of corresponding banking received by EU, as it has a kind of negative impact on the services trade between Africa and EU. And of course, I forgot this when I was, so we use gravity model. And the reason we did that is we are trying to look at forces that attract EU to Africa in terms of actually trading in services and some of the components of services. So like I was saying, quite some shocking outcome, but not in all situation that, in all estimation that we have this. So, So in terms of corresponding banking in, relationship that is in euro from the EU, we actually, realize some positive impact of, corresponding banking on services, trade between EU and Africa. But that is in the aggregate model now. And of course, the corresponding banking in USD in Africa, sent in from Africa, actually have some negative effect on the services trade between EU and Africa also. And of course, we also, in our model, we use corruption perception index, because when we are talking about de-risking, it's about hedging against some illicit capital flow, which of course corruption perception may have some some impact on that effect. So that's why that is included in the analysis and in the as one of the explanatory variables. So, but talking about time variant endogenous variable in our Osman-Taylor model and estimation, we realized that real GDP of Europe and of course of European sampled European countries and Africa actually have some positive impact on the services trade between EU and Africa. But the time invariant variables, we couldn't establish any significant effect of, on services trade between the two regions. So now going to the subsample of the 22 sampled EU economies and of course the 4 sampled African economies. The reason why we narrowed it down to 4 countries was that we, of course, due to that data constraints, in terms of how, the reports of some of these components of services by some of the African countries. So now for, travel services, for instance, we realized that real GDP per capita in Europe, among the European countries, actually drive the services trade between the two regions. And of course, population of Africa is also quite important. It's an important positive driver of services trade between the two regions. So, but of course, like we established in the aggregate model, the corresponding banking, cent in British pounds, from European countries, has some negative effect on the services trade between the, on the travel services trade between European Union and African countries. So of course, correlation perception index is also, in Europe, is also quite having some positive impact on services trade between the two regions. So we also found some, some outcome that we could say that, of course, and we could establish that in the literature, is that the corruption perception index of Africa is having some negative impact on the services trade between European Union and sampled African countries. And the reason being that we could establish that to what we have in the literature, the kind of, what do we call this? A greasing hypothesis of a thing. If that comes to my memory, I'll bring it up again. So now, for the telecom, the corresponding banking relationship sent in euro from European economy has some negative impact. And of course, it goes on and on like that in our estimations, mixed results, but overall, what we could establish from this is that we have a mixed result when we are talking about the impact of corresponding banking relationship on services trade between EU and Africa. For the negative effect of corresponding banking relationship, what that suggests is that there is a kind of low level of trade between Africa and EU when it comes to services trade. And of course, there could also be inefficiency in terms of, of course, it could come from the African side when it comes to financing and some of these cross-border services trade. And of course, not in all cases, we also realize that for some currencies, increase in corresponding banking relationship will actually drive the export of some of these services. So, and a sample of that, of course, we have seen in travel, travel services. You can go to the next slide, please. So now, in terms of overall implication, what we could read from the result is that the risk in US dollars, that is, if there's a reduction or decline in corresponding banking relationship in US dollar in Africa, sent from Africa, and that is sent from euro in EU, is going to have some kind of undesired effect on service trade between the two regions, and especially in travel businesses and, of course, other business services. So those are the two key sectors that we found corresponding banking relationship having positive impact. And of course, if there is an improvement in that regard, we can always be sure that services trade will be improved. But in the case we have negative impact of of corresponding banking relationship on the trade between EU and Africa, that suggests that the trade between the two in that regard is inefficient or is very low. So there's a need to, and those have policy implications. So I was almost mentioning the grease the wheels hypothesis when I was talking about the impact of corruption perception index having negative impact on the trade flow between Africa and EU in a situation whereby if corruption perception actually improves, it declines the services trade. That is unexpected, but of course it can be established in the literature. So, and of course, we also find some situation in which the real income from EU or in EU is actually having some negative impact on the on the trade, on services trade between EU and Africa, and of course that is talking about the huge disparities in income. And of course, when countries are having huge disparities in income, you can be sure that the taste will be different, and of course that may not drive the trade between the two. So can you go to the next slide, please? So now, in terms of recommendation from what we could read from our result, is that there will be a need to kind of safeguard the integrity of payments in US dollar and euro in the manner that we preserve the access to corresponding banking, especially when we are talking about trade in travel services and of course in other business services. So, and of course, looking at the one of the charts that we presented, we could see the huge disparities between corresponding banking in Africa and in EU. That then suggests that there's a need to build a kind of technical capacity of African financial institutions to effectively monitor and tackle illicit capital flow. No one wants to actually relate with a country that is, with a region that is characterized or that can be said to be highly very intensive in illicit capital flow. And of course, given the recent trends of terrorism and of course terrorism financing and other forms of corruption, you can be sure that it's going to have some unintended effect on the corresponding banking relationship. And of course, that will extend to ability of banking institution and financial institution to finance or to intermediate and of course to intermediate in terms of trade between the two regions. So and of course, a reform is also required to ensure that Africa has more corresponding banking, so that to measure up to what of course is obtainable in EU, even if that cannot be attained in the short term, at least over time, there should be some improvement. So of course, if these steps could be followed, we can be sure that service trade between Africa and EU will improve significantly. So that is what we have for the presentation. So we look forward for the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So again, let me kick off after reading with my 3 points. So first of all, why we like the paper, then some discussion points, and maybe then a third one, some extensions to policy. Now, why I personally liked your paper immediately when you send it in is that actually not many people know, but next to being an academic, I'm also a businessman. And with the new government of Sudan, I had to find a correspondence bank, and how hard that was. So how hard was it actually from two sides to get approval? Because you tend to have correspondence banks, but even are they approved in practice is an issue here, because from both sides. So that's extremely hard. And so from personal experience, I just found out how important the topic is you're actually touching upon. Maybe people would say correspondence banks, what was it again? But how blocking they can be, or the absence of them can be in trade with African countries is very, very important. But I also think about, as an important component, is that we as a group are funded by the European Union, and I think that the emphasis that the European Union puts on economic relationships with Africa will be increasingly important. But that will also come to the policy relevance, is that if I look at the shifting of attention in Europe in relation to Africa, the thing of, let's say, not so much corruption, but counterterrorism, and how that actually works with correspondence bank is increasing in importance dramatically. So that might not only relate to where you're from Nigeria, we mentioned other issues, but if you think about other northern African countries, including also that's Sudan, and the effect of correspondence banking and the increased scrutiny of counterterrorism elements is super important kind of a topic. So that was the first thing that I really liked, the policy relevance of it. The second thing is that you also, especially Ronke, you talked about the empirical, the setting, but also Salomon is about this very careful setup of the gravity model and the choices you made with the many zeros, the discussion in the paper, which you not touched upon, the Poisson kind of issues. So I think you did really a good job of making the empirical strategy credible. And why is that so important? We all see, you talked about the unbalanced panel, we all expect data to be not super here. So the more emphasis you put, the big emphasis you put in the paper on actually getting the methods right, and why, and motivating why you made certain choices in a difficult, let's say, empirical environment is very, very nice to read, a very, very strong point, I think, of the paper. And the third one was that, and it was also in the beginning, I saw that Hildegard was picking up her notebook at a certain slide, and I actually did the same while reading the paper, because what you do really well in this is that you connect the gravity literature, in which Hildegard is an expert, to more local literature and also more qualitative literature to motivate why these things are important. And if you look at some of the literature you're adding, so you may be stressing the more traditional literature in your slide, but in your paper you have lots of, let's say, very relevant contextual references. Then so you make it really well embedded, I think, in the policy context of Africa. So that I also liked about the depth of that element. So that were my 3 points, which I really thought were very, very good about the paper. Now there are some points to discuss, and so one thing you focus a bit with Hausmann-Taylor on the endogeneity and reverse causality between GDP and trade and things like that. But I was wondering how endogenous is correspondent banking itself. So you make one comment about the fact that there is the SWIFT payment system for which you may or may not need correspondent bank. This is a pretty complicated issue, I think. So in practicing banking, when do you need correspondent banking or not, or for what, is an issue. And then the question also is that, so is it not also driven by other factors in the relationship? So why not instrument for it on a story perspective? So if you were to say de-risking has a cause in, for example, terrorism threat or corruption, and so why not have a bit more story kind of instrumenting? Because these things are slow moving. So with, let's say, lagged variables, very different. So maybe there's more to the story where you can use the reasons why you would assume that would be connected to the changes in correspondence banking, but not to the changes in trade and services would work out as a kind of story kind of instrument. Not because of reverse causality, but purely to capture the endogeneity of the concept of correspondent banking itself. So that would be my first kind of area. The second is that I'm puzzled, and what I need a bit of inspiration is why the dependent variable is trade and services. So I was thinking about it, why that is. So I was thinking, if you talk about correspondent banking, often this is used as trade financing kind of component. So even barter trade, you need counter, you need correspondent banking to have the accounts for trade insurance. So I was thinking, but doesn't this rely more to the general trading routes? So I have struggled a bit why there would be such an important relation between correspondence banking and de-risking correspondence and the trade in services. I would say that it facilitates more trade in manufacturing goods. So why narrow it down, in a sense, to trade in services? That was a bit like a puzzle to me. So you want to say something about trade in services, that's fine. But I would say that the more general issue would be this de-risking with respect to the overall trade flows, which are probably more important. Maybe I miss a point here. My third point would be is that, yeah, you do subsamples. You make a subsample of the large countries because they're probably different. Clearly, if you think about banking, it's good that you also take Morocco because it's often very much underestimated in how important it is from a financial services perspective in Africa, across Africa, true, especially through Barclays, indeed. But I was wondering why a difference approach with the other countries could not be more fruitful. Maybe simply by interacting, but why look at subsamples and not at the difference effect of correspondent banking? Maybe we gain some more information about that, about the relative importance of correspondence banking by keeping the sample intact instead of looking at a very small subsample. Because then, yeah, I understand that if you have 4 countries, but still a substantial number of years, the Houseman setup still works, but how credible is it to sell the paper with that? So maybe that's. Now, from a policy perspective, my third component, I think that if you're from Nigeria, this might not be at the top of your mind, but where I think that your paper for Africa is very important is in the economic partnership agreement discussion. And there you have also the discussion in a recent paper by Sykes and Steiger. They make the argument that that we should not focus in services trade liberalization by focusing on domestic, let's say, liberalization, because it would, I would say, in my words, it would distract from true shallow liberalization. So all this broadening of deep trade agreements actually create too much leverage for not going after the big things. So I would like to, which could be simple trade liberalization in agricultural products, for example. So a question is there not a trade-off nowadays by also addressing the points of support for services in the financial services on the one hand, and overburdening the trade relations between Africa and Europe that needs so much more liberalization than we have today. So is it wise to stress services trade liberalization in that context, or should we do first things first and liberalize other things? That would be my first thing. The second thing is that I've not heard much about foreign direct investments. This was also something that was stressed in the previous thing, but I would say that if you look at correspondence banks across Africa, I would say that they are probably shaped a lot by past, let's say, but also current FDI patterns. So maybe to address that point is, how does it connect to the previous paper of liberalization in foreign direct investments? And how could those kind of initiatives on the investment front, so we are trade and investment in services, how can that liberalization and FDI drive this agenda much better? And the third one is yeah, how, maybe in the future, how do you see this going in the future? So what the paper is strong is actually pointing to the fact that this is going on. I was not overly, let's say, convinced by the bar slides of recent services, but what my gut feeling is says that is going to be a major problem in the coming 5 to 6 years. What you're stressing upon. So maybe Motivate is also a bit looking at the future where financial relations and de-risking is increasingly a problem, not only in the past 5 or 6 years. So my last would be is, can you also in your concluding moment speculate a bit of how can we shoot at the future to get this right and not de-risk too much? Okay, thanks. So now the floor is back to you.
Okay, so yeah, thank you for the comments. We quite appreciate them. But talking about the endogeneity, that is, you asked a question that how endogenous is the corresponding banking itself and corresponding banking relationship itself. I think at that point, we may need to do more formal tests of actually confirming the endogeneity of, or the exogeneity, truly exogeneity of corresponding banking relationship as estimated in our model. And of course, talking about the, let me see, so you are talking about what is the, how does the corresponding banking relationship affect certain services? Take for instance, when one is talking about tourism, do I need corresponding banking if I'm going for tourism in the country? Yes, and that was one of the reasons why we actually disentangled the services trade into components, so that we're able to demystify the different effects of corresponding banking. And of course, the result actually shows that I mean, in some instances, the corresponding banking relationship doesn't even have effect on some forms of services trade. So I think that was we thought about that when we were doing this. So now another one is why did we narrow down into trade in services? Why not even merchandise trade? Why not? So I think we just followed the call because it was basically on trade and services. So we narrowed down our analysis to that aspect. And of course, we know that when we are talking about corresponding banking relationship, is quite also relevant and also important even in financing the merchandise trade. And of course, that is going to be the next line of action in terms of research that we have also been discussing of taking up. So now the sampling, okay. So saying 11 countries, then later on narrow it down to, African countries, then narrowing them down to 4 African countries. Yes, first we have data constraints. Yes, when it comes to trading services, and of course in this case bilateral trading services is quite, thanks for the OECD that has some data in that regard. So yes, but of course these sampled countries, I'm talking about African countries, even the sampled European countries, when we are talking about trade in services between EU and Africa, and of course trade generally, they account for almost over 70% of the trade relationship between the two regions. So we thought that, the expectation is that our sample actually reflects what is happening between the two regions. So given the volume and the proportion of trade relationship, trade that is being accounted for by these sampled countries. So you talked about, okay, the importance of in terms of policy recommendation, talking about economic partnership agreements. Yes, that came to mind when we were, but one thing is that with the Brexit in place, we were trying to be careful because we are sure that if Brexit goes through, there may be realignment in terms of some of these policies, and of course several things may actually change. So that was why we were not talking in that regard. So and of course, you mentioned the issue of FDI and other. So, of course, it's also quite important. We have certain FDI that is also, but we thought that when we are talking about trade in services, it covers both one that are within the FDI and otherwise. So, and of course, it's something that we can also look at going forward. So, about the future and about speculating about the future, like I said, these are things that this is still a draft significantly. We will look at this and then see how we can improve the paper. Thank you. So I want to be sure if my colleague has a follow-up to that.
Ronke, from your side, something to add?
Okay, yeah, Solomon has said most of it. I just want to buttress the fact on the Economic Partnership Agreement. On the side of AFCFTA also, you find out that services trade is yet at the back burner. It's not one of the main topics they're considering under the agreement. So that's also to buttress what Solomon said about the Economic Partnership Agreement.
Okay, let me open up the floor to the other network members. Questions? Jane is unmuting herself. Hildegun is unmuting herself. Hildegun, can you go first if you have questions?
Sure. So again, thank you for a very nice paper, and I think the issue is super important. And I also think that that this is something that our funders need to hear, because the focus is very much about all the good objectives of kind of de-risking, but it's very little thought about the impact on, for instance, Africa. So I think this is super important in that context. So very much welcome paper. And then I was thinking a bit along the lines as Heinz about, for instance, foreign direct investment in the financial sector. That would be interesting to look at also as under your recommendations, whether you could consider opening up to FDI in financial services as one of your recommendations. And the other thing that I think would be interesting to talk a bit more about in your paper is the role of this corresponding banks. So you have basically several roles here. You have as kind of facilitating trade transactions, and then the issue about credit, and then also export credit could be an issue. So what role this corresponding bank play for these various functions of finance in relation to trade? And in that regard, it could also be interesting to look at to what extent the different services differ in their kind of financing intensity. So services are usually kind of intangible goods that there is not much collateral or that kind of thing. So how does services differ from, how do services differ from goods in that respect in the way that they use credit in trade transactions? So shedding more light on this would be interesting. And I also think highlighting what role services play for trading goods, and that could also be a channel, is already mentioned, but I think these are interesting issues. But definitely the paper is kind of right and timely.
Right and timely. Christopher. No points. Jane. Okay.
Sorry, I don't have detailed comments, but like Hildegun, I mean, I'm looking still at that last screen being shared on the in front of me, and like Hildegun, I think that what's being talked about here will help to facilitate not only more services trade between Africa and the EU, but more trade full stop, because unless the payment processes are safe, it's impacting also on merchandise trade. But I was delighted that we received this paper, because I always feel there's not enough work done specifically on financial services, and it's a critical backbone sector to the economy. Impacts on everything. So I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed tonight's presentation too.
I also enjoy watching Sarah, but I think we only watch Sarah now. So you have to unmute yourself. But
it's not worth listening to.
no, but I don't see the others now. I think you changed the.
I don't know what I've done then. Okay.
So,
I don't
so
know.
if you go to gallery view some back, then.
I'm trying to find it.
I have everybody. I can see everybody.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry, you can only see me. I don't know what.
Maybe, yeah, I'm back. So, okay. So I thank you all for joining then the seminar, and it was very. I'm not sure Tu is always a bit different with the connection, but we have not heard from him. But it has been compliments for the papers, but also compliments for the presenters from a technical perspective of making such an orderly contribution and sticking to the time and being so clear about it. So I think that this was a very nice event. And yeah, for us, it was quite important to not only just receive your papers, of which you put in such hard work, but also to do our part from our side to help improve the papers. And especially many of them are in a stage where they're more or less very close to finished. But we hope to make some bit of an inroad in adding some things to it. So yeah, my last comment would be is to just good luck with submitting the papers, getting it published. I have all high hopes that will succeed in the near future. And lastly, I hope to get in contact and to keep in contact with you, and that you will find an interest in our next events, and that you keep on participating also in the network. And especially also for the African friends, this was a great addition, the topic, especially from the perspective of the EU, to have. So it is quite of a diamond for us to have a paper like this in also our program. So I hope you can keep on contributing with these kind of analysis in the future. Jane, as the chair of, you wanted to say something?
Very minor thing, just to say that although our university closes tomorrow afternoon for a Christmas break, we will get the recording of this webinar up on the website so that you can listen again to the comments. Sometimes it's just very hard to write them down as you're listening to them, but you will be able to hear them and to have the opportunity to review also your own performance online and you know what it looks like for an audience, because I think it's become so important now that we practice our digital skills, our presentation skills. So we recorded it, and it will go online, and you will be able to review it. And I think Sarah has asked you for your PowerPoint presentation, which was excellent, because we will also put that up on the website along with the working paper.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Over to you as the technical organizer to close the meeting.
Say goodbye, good night.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
You have a Christmas song now, or just close us down. But thank you all for
everyone, and to the young scholars for their time too. Valuable. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.